What if, as opposed to trying to add activities to your life, add new sports, add new dinner parties, add new espresso beans, whatever it is you're adding, why don't you take a minute and try and think about what you can actually take away? There is a modern movement known as minimalism. And minimalism is basically an escape from what most of us are bombarded with hearing, and that is that we should accumulate more. More of everything, more wealth, more possessions, more things, more status, even. That we have to embark on this endless chase for more, more, period. The thing about this is obviously it's endless, and so anything that is endless never ends, and what ends up happening, if you chase possessions, wealth, status, you end up feeling trapped. You end up feeling overwhelmed, and you end up feeling the thing that none of us want to feel, which is empty. Just empty. And so we have minimalism, the modern movement, which says something like, hey, why don't you try living with less? Why don't you try tempering your desires? Why don't you try not spending any money for a week, 2 weeks, a month? And so it's really to counter this modern bombardment that we all have, this consumer-driven society for more. Now, obviously, fundamentally, that is a very Stoic idea. Just the idea that we can live with less, that we can find true contentment without achieving more things. In fact, the Stoics say anything material, possessions, wealth, even status, which they might say reputation, all of these things we really have no control over, and they should not really affect our happiness because they're not reflective of our character. And so, this modern movement of minimalism, if you think about what it really is at its core, it's really about living simply. And living simply, obviously, if you think about the word Stoicism and what it means the philosophy of the porch. It's a very simple philosophy. They used to talk about how to live a good life on the porch. Marcus Aurelius would often remind himself to, quote, keep things simple and straightforward. Simplicity, in the Stoic sense, it means looking at the world that we live in, looking at all the things you're worried about, and being able to discern and cut away all the things that are really unnecessary, and instead to concentrate on what is actually aligned with your values, which, if you're a Stoic, is living appropriately. And so, again, the Stoic doctrine of focusing on one's character, right? Live according to nature. We can really achieve that, or at least in some part, by practicing what the Stoics would call living simply. Have a look at Epictetus, another Stoic philosopher. He obviously was the main driver of the Stoic dichotomy of control. And when you think about what that means in the context of what we're talking about, it means, well, letting go of external desires, possessions, social status, even things like approval from others, including your friends, including your parents. All of these things were outside of your control. And so Epictetus didn't say that we should ignore them, but what he did say is that we should detach ourselves from them and really free ourselves from the anxiety that comes from all of that. And so Stoicism fundamentally would agree with this call for minimalism, would agree with trying to be content with less. It's a very interesting idea that there are several different ways to get wealthy. And if you think about what wealth is when you have more than you could possibly desire. You think about someone that's a billionaire. They have way more money than they could ever desire. And they are defined as being wealthy. But there's two parts to that equation. There's having more money, having more wealth, having more possessions, and then there's wanting less, there's desiring less. And so you can become wealthy by desiring less. It's very interesting. We never think about that. We always think more. But in reality, that's not the only way to get wealthy. We can get wealthy by desiring less. Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. And so let's talk about minimalism, what it practically means. First, I'll get into the superficial part of it in some sense, but this is not mundane. And that is just decluttering your life physically. If you look around your bedroom, your apartment, your office, your house, your home, you're probably going to see a lot of things that you don't really need. You're going to see a lot of things that are just sitting there. You might not have even thought about them for so long, but because they are part of the furniture, quite literally in some sense, you don't really notice them anymore. But all of these things are cluttering. Have you ever had a shelf and you start to put a couple things on the shelf, some decorations, maybe a few books, and then you start putting on a few more things and a few more things, and before you know it, the shelf is just completely full. And then think about how different that feels than a shelf that has some space in between everything. It's more roomy. Well, the same thing happens in our physical spaces. We get things, too many, we get clutter. And so a large part of minimalism is just decluttering from a physical standpoint. And so what does that look like? Well, have a look around, man. What have you not used in a long time? Maybe you can get rid of it. Maybe you can dig up those boxes in your closet that you haven't opened. Let me tell you something. I was decluttering as part of last weekend's random rituals, and I found this old Tom Petty shirt. Now, Tom Petty's one of my favorite musicians, and I had this shirt. It's from his 40-year concert, and I opened it up, and, there's a little bit of nostalgia there. But I thought, I've had this shirt for years, and it has remained folded in the closet. And it's not something I would wear. It's something that I just wanted to have. And I thought, why am I keeping this? I can get the same nostalgia from listening to his music and being reminded of the concert I went to. I can get the same nostalgia from talking about that concert with friends. So I took that shirt and I put it in a bag and I donated it. But it's funny how we like to hold on to things just for that one little thing, that 1 minute moment that you haul out this t-shirt once every 6 months and you look at it. And then if you multiply that by 1,000, you have all these things lying around taking up space. It's distraction. It's noise. And so the idea that we can actually get rid of some of that stuff, maybe get rid of some of the things that we are clinging on for no particular reason other than habit. Man, when you declutter your physical space, you end up decluttering your mind. Leading me to the next part of Stoic minimalism, which would be getting rid of the things that we have mentally and emotionally that are unnecessary, or reducing the time we spend on activities that don't align with our values. If you really think about all the things that you are carrying around in your head that you just don't need in there, regret, embarrassment. Man, what about projections to the future? What about desires for the future? Things that are taking you away from the present moment. Just unnecessary things in your head. And then if you think about just from a perspective of time, how much time do you spend on things that you don't need to spend time on? How much time do you spend looking through social media? How much time do you spend angry? How much time do you spend having road rage that you don't need to have? And so a huge part of Stoicism, of course, is zoning in on the things that are actually important and eliminating the things that are not. And what is that if not decluttering? In a sense, Stoicism is about minimalism, emotionally, mentally, and yes, physically. It's about tempering desires. And again, learning to live with less. And here's the thing about that. As you declutter, you open up room for more important things. What are those more important things? Well, what about personal development? What about personal growth? What about relationships? What about inner peace, self-reliance? How about as opposed to scrolling through Facebook, you just sit there. You just sit there and think. What if as opposed to trying to add activities to your life, add new sports, add new dinner parties, add new espresso beans, whatever it is you're adding, why don't you take a minute and try and think about what you can actually take away? And I think what you'll find is that as you take unnecessary things away, you have more room for the things that are actually important. Minimalists, letting go of attachments. Stoicism teaches, of course, that attachment to anything material, any transient, is a recipe for suffering. But if you're a minimalist, you're trying to fight that. You're trying to say, I don't need this. And in fact, there's a lovely trick from Seneca who said something like, you should look at your possessions not as something that you own, but as something that you borrow. Everything you have is borrowed because you can't really own anything. What can you actually own other than your character? The only thing you can really own is your character. Everything else, your material possessions, your money, your wealth, your relationships even. A lot of these things, you're not owning them, you're borrowing them. I like how a lot of the modern movements that we see today, a lot of them are fundamentally stoic. And minimalism is not something you might feel, I don't know, a lot of joy to go do. But if you really think about what it just means decluttering. It means getting rid of things that you don't need to allow room for things that are more important. Desire is endless, man. That's the problem. Is no matter how many things you buy, no matter how much money you make, no matter how much you quote level up in life, there's always going to be another level. You're always going to want more. And Stoicism says You don't need to. You don't need to keep chasing things. You can actually be content with what you have right now. And thank God for that, because the only thing we ever have is the thing that we have right now. And so minimalism is really, at its core, it's about self-sufficiency, materially, emotionally, and spiritually. And so if you can get rid of the things in life that you don't need, you will open it up to things that are important, the things that come naturally to us when we get rid of the noise. Those things are peace and freedom from living simply and staying true to who we are.